I'm 76 years old and I was an air traffic controller. People hear that and they think radar screens and headsets. They don't think about the silence. The silence after you give a command and you wait to see if two planes just missed each other or if you just killed 400 people. I heard that silence once. It lasted about 6 seconds. It changed the rest of my life. My name is Walter. I worked approach control at a major international airport for 29 years. If you've ever flown into a big city at night, my voice or someone like me was the last thing your pilot heard before landing. We don't fly the planes. We separate them. We keep metal tubes full of human beings from occupying the same piece of sky at the same time, and most days you do it so many times it starts to feel routine. That's the trap. Because the moment it feels routine is the moment you forget what you're actually holding in your hands. Let me explain something about this job that people don't understand. You're sitting in a dim room, no windows. The only light comes from the radar scope in front of you. Green and white targets moving slowly across a dark background. Each target has a tag, flight number, altitude, speed. You talk to the pilots, they talk to you, and between the two of you, you keep everyone alive. Simple enough, until it isn't. There's a term we used, dealing. When you're dealing, you're fully locked in. You're sequencing arrivals, stacking departures, adjusting speeds, assigning headings. Your brain is running calculations constantly. Not math exactly, more like spatial geometry at high speed. Where is this aircraft going to be in 90 seconds? Where will that one be? What happens if the first one slows down? What happens if the wind shifts? You hold all of it in your head at once, and if you drop a single piece, people can die. That's not a metaphor. That's the job. I want you to understand that before I tell you about November 14th, 1991, it was a Thursday night. I remember that because my daughter had a school play that evening and I'd promised to be there. I wasn't. I was on the overnight shift. The weather was deteriorating. Fog rolling in, ceiling dropping, visibility going from 5 miles down to 1.5 miles in about 40 minutes. When the weather gets bad, everything compresses. Planes that were comfortably separated suddenly aren't. Speeds change, routes change, the whole system tightens, and your margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. I had maybe 12 aircraft on my scope. That doesn't sound like a lot, but at night in bad weather, with half of them running low on fuel from holding patterns, 12 is plenty. Here's the part I need you to hear. 2 of those targets were converging, a heavy wide-body inbound from overseas, descending through 8,000, and a regional turboprop climbing out of runway 228, turning north. The computer had them separated. According to the system, they were fine. Standard vertical separation. One going up, one coming down. They'd pass with 1,000 feet between them. Clean. Legal. Routine. But something felt wrong. I'd been doing this for 22 years by that point, and there's a feeling you develop that isn't in any manual. You look at the scope and the geometry doesn't sit right in your chest. The targets were converging faster than they should have been. The wide body was descending quicker than his assigned rate. The turboprop was climbing slowly, probably heavy, probably fighting a headwind at that altitude, and the system still showed them separated, 1,000 feet, legal. But I could see it, or I could feel it. The closure rate was wrong. If the wide body kept descending fast and the turboprop kept climbing slow, that 1,000 feet was going to shrink, maybe not to 0, but maybe to 300, maybe less, in fog, at night, with no visual contact between the two cockpits. This is the moment. Right here. This is the decision that sits in the center of my life like a stone I can't move. I had 2 options. Trust the system. The computer said they were separated. Procedure said maintain current clearances. My supervisor, if he'd been watching, would have said they're fine, Walter, leave them alone. Or break the sequence, issue a new heading to the turboprop. Turn him west, away from the wide-body's descent path, blow up the departure sequence, delay 3 other aircraft, probably trigger a go-around for an arrival behind the wide-body. The system said they were fine. My gut said they weren't. I had maybe 4 seconds to decide. 4 seconds. That's not enough time to think. It's barely enough time to feel. But that's the reality of this job. You don't get the luxury of certainty. You get information, instinct, and a microphone. I keyed the mic. Regional 472. Turn left heading 270 immediately. Traffic alert. The pilot responded, started his turn. The wide-body kept descending. And for about 6 seconds, I watched the 2 targets on my scope and waited to see if I'd made the right call, or if I'd just panicked and wrecked a perfectly good sequence for nothing. Those 6 seconds, I can still feel them. Silence in the room, the hum of the equipment, the green glow on my hands. Waiting, you can't speed up radar. You can't make the targets move faster. You just watch and breathe and wait. The targets diverged. The turboprop turned west. The wide-body passed through his altitude. They were never closer than 700 feet vertically by the final data. The system would have called it a clean pass. 700 feet is legal separation in most configurations. But here's what the system didn't show. A month later, the Incident Review Board pulled the full radar data with enhanced resolution. The wide-body had briefly exceeded his descent rate by almost 800 feet per minute. The turboprop had leveled off momentarily, a common thing when a smaller aircraft hits unexpected wind. If I hadn't turned the turboprop, if I'd trusted the system for another 30 seconds, the vertical separation would have compressed to less than 200 feet, in fog, at night. 200 feet between a wide body and a turboprop. That's close enough to feel the wake turbulence. That's close enough to lose the smaller aircraft entirely. But that's not what the board focused on. What they focused on was that I had broken the departure sequence without authorization. I had issued a traffic alert without confirmed loss of separation. I had, in their words, deviated from established procedure based on subjective assessment. I received a formal letter of counseling, not a punishment exactly, more like a stain. A note in my file that said Walter doesn't always follow the book. And that's the part nobody tells you about doing the right thing. Sometimes the right thing looks like a mistake on paper. Sometimes protecting people doesn't show up in the data. Because the data only records what happened, it doesn't record what almost happened. It doesn't record the 6 seconds you spent wondering if you just saved 300 lives or just embarrassed yourself for no reason. I carried that letter for years. It sat in my personnel file like a small wound that wouldn't close. Every annual review, there it was. My supervisor at the time told me I needed to trust the system more. He said, "Walter, you can't control traffic on feelings. That's how accidents happen." He wasn't wrong in general, but he was wrong that night. I never told my wife the details. I went home that morning, slept a few hours, went to work the next night, and kept separating airplanes. That's what you do. You don't get to process. You don't get to sit with the weight of it. You get back on the scope and you deal. But November 14th never left me. It lived in the back of my skull like a low hum. Every time I sat down at that scope, part of me was still watching those 2 targets converge. Still asking myself whether I was right or whether I got lucky. Still hearing my supervisor say, "Trust the system, Walter." Here's what nobody prepares you for in this profession. You will never know for certain whether your instinct saved lives or whether the system would have handled it. You live in a permanent state of maybe. Maybe I prevented a disaster. Maybe I overreacted. There's no experiment you can run, no alternate timeline you can check. You just carry it. 11 years later, I'm at a retirement dinner for a colleague. The usual thing, bad hotel food, speeches, people telling stories about the old days, and a man walks up to me, mid-40s. He introduces himself and says he's a pilot for a regional airline. He says he used to fly turboprops out of our airport in the early 90s. And then he says something I wasn't ready for. He says, "You probably don't remember this, but one night, maybe 90 or 91, I was climbing out of 228 and you gave me an immediate left turn, traffic alert. I never saw the other aircraft, but my TCAS went off right after I started the turn. My first officer looked out the window and saw landing lights above us in the fog. Close, real close. I always wanted to thank whoever was working that night." I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stood there holding a glass of wine, and then I said it was me, and he shook my hand, and that was it. No ceremony, no official record. Just a man telling me that 22 years of sitting in a dark room had meant something on one specific night that the system said was fine. After he walked away, I went to the bathroom and sat in a stall for about 10 minutes. I wasn't crying exactly. I don't know what I was doing. Something between relief and grief. Relief because I'd spent 11 years wondering, and grief because I realized how many other nights like that might have existed for other controllers who never got their answer, who carried their maybe to the grave. I retired 3 years after that conversation, 29 years in the dark room. The last thing I did on my last shift was unplug my headset, put it on the console and walk out. No fanfare. You just stop. Now I sit on my porch most mornings. I watch planes fly over, little silver shapes against the blue. And I think about the person sitting in the dark room below them, watching dots, running geometry in their head, holding hundreds of lives between a microphone and a radar scope. I think about the decisions they're making that nobody will ever see, the instincts they're following that no manual taught them, the silence they sit through while they wait to find out if they were right. And I think about my letter of counseling, still in a file cabinet somewhere, or maybe shredded by now. And I think about a turboprop pilot who saw landing lights in the fog above him and his first officer's face in that moment. And I think about my daughter's school play that I missed. Here's the one thing I know after 76 years. The decisions that matter most in your life will not come with instructions. They won't come with time to think. They won't come with approval or applause. They will come in silence, in darkness, in moments so compressed that all you have is what you've built inside yourself over years of paying attention. And when they come, the system will tell you one thing, and something deeper will tell you another. And you will have about 4 seconds to choose. Trust what you've built, even when the system disagrees, even when the file says you were wrong, even when you spend 11 years wondering, because the system only knows what it can measure. And some things, the most important things, can't be measured at all. If you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where you followed your gut when everyone and everything told you not to, I'd like to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to trust themselves more. And subscribe because I have a few more things I'd like to say while I still can. The scope is dark now, but I'm still watching.